Welcome, Mike Temperato to Restitutio. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Honored to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. For those of you who aren't familiar, Restitutio is a podcast dedicated to recovering authentic Christianity and living it out today. Mike Temperato is also Metaphysics Mike, and he's known from his YouTube channel. And on December 1st, you debated Al Garza on the question, is Jesus Yahweh? What was your before I ask you about how did you feel about your experience? I want to ask you, how did that come about? How did that end up getting set up?
Yeah, so Al Garza has taken a lot of time to refute some of my videos, including some of the new stuff we're doing with the UCA, responding to, viral Trinitarian content. And he's also had some choice words. Sometimes I think he could be kind of rude. Uh, and he was asking me to debate for probably about like 1, maybe 2 months. And eventually I
So
just agreed.
he's been reaching out to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, eventually I just said, okay. I said yes. That what happens on like YouTube, at least my experience so far, is that they'll reach out to different debate platforms that they've seen me on, and the moderators try and middleman that. So, people just kept saying, do you want to do this debate? Do you want to do it? And so I said, let's do it, Al. All right. He
I
wants
love
to
that.
smoke.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I'm not very knowledgeable of debaters on YouTube. I had never heard of Al Garza. I guess he's kind of well known in certain circles. I think maybe 50,000 followers. Do I have that right?
hmm
So, yeah, it's kind of a big deal for you to get that exposure and access to his audience, which is, in my opinion, the real value of debates is getting access to an audience that would never consider what you're saying. But since their guys in the ring fighting too, they'll listen. So,
Yeah, right.
what would you say your experience was like? How would it's been what, 3 days now. So, looking back on it, how do you feel about it?
So it was originally supposed to be on a different date. And just like a few days later, when I was going to be back here at my home in New York, but something happened. They needed to move it to the first. And so I was actually in Colorado with my family for Thanksgiving. So, I was inside a little bit torqued just because, 4 hours on the last day there with my family, it kind of would have been nice to spend it with them. But in the grand scheme, this is what I do, and my family, they're so awesome. They made it possible for me to join. So that was like the first thing. I wasn't at home, and I was just thinking about family. But other than that, I thought it was good. I like Donnie. I like the channel. I was concerned that he would be kind of toxic, but he wasn't. I thought in
I
terms
thought
of
he
how
was pretty great.
yeah. He's not really been that cool in the comment section.
Okay,
Just
so he,
just say
as a commenter, he's a little more fierce, but in person, he never seemed to lose his cool, and he was kind
yeah.
of like a little, if anything, low energy.
Yeah, so I was happy about that for sure. And I mean, if I was just going to give my general thoughts in terms of my arguments about Yahweh being a name, like a real name, right? Not a personal name in a human sense. That was one of the very weird things he said. He presupposed Trinitarianism by actually defining Yahweh as one being of three persons. And even that he sort of derived from the meaning of Yahweh about being basically self-existing, right? Who was, who is to come. But like, I mean, that was like a crazy jump. He made a ton of assertions that I don't think were well supported. So I don't think he was able to demonstrate that Yahweh isn't a name, just like every other name, right? Which picks out an individual. I don't think he gave any good reason why the certain divine attributes that Jesus could have, whether that's forgiving sins, performing miracles, that these must mean that he's Yahweh, like by his nature. I don't think he disproved my point at all, right? The Bible explicitly states Jesus himself, that, his authority doesn't come from himself. His actions, his all his teachings. So I don't think he did well on that. Um, he also gave no real good explanation for the contradictions in the hypostatic union, right? So if Jesus is truly God, if he's Yahweh, then he can't sin, for example. Sin's not even possible. But we know that according to the scriptures that Jesus was genuinely tempted and he had a free will choice to whether he was going to obey God or not. And that's just outside the realm of what Trinitarian offers. If he is truly God, then he cannot sin in virtue of his nature and virtue of being one person. I really don't think he addressed that at all. He just kept asserting God could never actually save anybody through a man. Like that was pretty off. Okay, places I think I could have done better. I'm definitely unfamiliar with the Peshitta. Uh,
Who isn't?
so yeah, so I mean, I know that, like, obviously it's later than like the earliest text of the
Yeah,
Greek New Testament.
yeah.
I knew that. But
The
I think I
Peshitta.
could I think I could have
And
done better on that.
yeah, let's circle back to that. What else were you going to say?
So
Areas where you said you could do better.
I think it would have been better for me to press him on some of his earlier statements. So, he asked to actually make it 20-minute openers. And the more I do these debates, the more I actually think it's probably better to be shorter. And the reason why is because then we can actually focus on just one or two things. Like, really, that whole debate could have just been about whether the name Yahweh is a name like we think of any other
Yeah,
name. Like,
yeah.
just that alone is like the core of my position, and for him to refute that, I think supports his. But you get 20 minutes, you can, like, it's hard to handle a dozen claims, so I sort of wish I
Well,
had focused a bit
his
more.
claims were not necessarily logical. They were linguistic. They were very finely tuned statements spoken very quickly, but they were not. Uh, he wasn't building based on facts that were available to everyone and that are clear.
Yeah.
They were idiosyncratic, in other words. And that, I think, really threw me off where because I don't really watch these things anyhow. I just listen. So I'm not looking at his PowerPoints. I'm just listening. I'm just like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? Like, I didn't even understand it until I went back and actually looked at his PowerPoints because he didn't even cite the verse in the audio. It's just, he just said, oh, well, everyone can see it. So, but
Yeah.
then when I look back at it, I was like, oh, he has like some really weird ideas that are not universal in Christianity or in scholarship or in anything
Hmm.
in Trinitarian Christianity. And
Yeah.
so as a result of that, and he doesn't like actually explain any of those things. He just like, oh, I'm assuming this unstated assumption. And on the basis of that, this case works. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of that. Whereas your opening statement was using just common sense reasoning that everyone has access to. So I think you definitely like. I'm sure Al Garza's crew that always listens to his stuff and thinks the way he does about the Aramaic and all this stuff. Like I'm sure they were just like not at all convinced by you because you didn't engage on any of those points. But like everybody else that's not an Al Garzaite, if I could put it that way, has no idea what he was talking about, including me, who has a lot of experience in Bible stuff and multiple degrees. I know I understand the words coming out of his mouth, but I don't think they mean what he thinks they mean.
Yeah.
So, I think that was kind of a really interesting contrast where you're just like using regular everyday language, and he has kind of like this specialized jargon that he was. I don't know if this jargon is the right specialized form of argument that he was using. Um,
Can I
so
can I make a comment here?
yeah, please.
Yeah, so that is intentional. It's very intentional. I'm trying to speak very simply. I want to. I love how you said just being accessible, very normal way of thinking about it, just the words. I just want people to read the Bible, be able to understand its plain, sort of meaning. Not to say that there aren't some things we could go deeper on, looking at original words, context, history, all that stuff definitely matters. But I'm so intentional about trying to make it simple, making a lot of the work that I read by you, by other people at the UCA, by other scholars, just condense it, make it super simple. Okay, that said, it makes me feel a little insecure sometimes because I mean I know I'm going in to speak with a PhD, and I know he's going to hit us with a bunch of jargon, and I feel like people are used to that in Trinitarianism, like people just kind of pulling the wool over their eyes. I was speaking with Dale Tuggy, whom he I thought made a good comment. He's like, when people listen to something like this, even though all the things you pointed out, his views are kind of fringe. He says a lot of things that really are not even common in Trinitarianism. But because Trinitarians have a bias towards Trinitarianism, like they're likely to just kind of accept that. Um, where that makes it a bit more challenging, I think, for me, because now I'm having to try and dismantle something that's really not common. At the beginning, I pointed out that even Trinitarians, a lot of Orthodox, believe that Jesus is only Yahweh through predication. So all those little things I think matter, and I certainly have to learn how to I don't know, say it simply but confidently. I'm still learning how to do this right.
Well, you have to separate your internal and your external. How you felt is not necessarily how we saw you or how you came across. Okay. So I'm just speaking for myself. You came across to me as confident and as somebody that's just like, Al, what you're saying here is not mainstream among your own people. Right. So I think, maybe internally you might feel some of this anxiety, but I think honestly you came across really well. And one of the most incredible things was Al's rebuttal, where he did not rebut a single one of your points. And instead, he just repeated his opening statement,
Yeah.
which tells me one of two things. Either he did not listen to what you're saying at all, or he could not come up with arguments, that fast. I mean, it's right on the fly, right?
Mhm.
To respond. Either he wasn't listening, he couldn't come up with something, or he just didn't think it was worthwhile, and he just rather repeat his, he was just like cheating in a sense. Like, I'm just going to repeat my talking points because I don't want to give any quarter to his thoughts. Did you notice that in the
Oh,
moment?
absolutely, and 2 or
So I
3
thought that was really
times.
weird.
Yeah, in his rebuttal, so he holds the positive, so he goes first, right? So when he did his rebuttal first, he's like restating his intro points, his presentation, just like you pointed out, and then he would say things like, Michael never addressed this. Michael never pointed this out. I'm like, dude, I was giving my opening presentation, right? Like, I haven't even had a chance really to rebuttal you. I don't like that when people, just because they go second, they turn their opening into a rebuttal, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that didn't make sense either to me.
That I don't mind that, just for the record, but
Okay.
that is a debater's trick to do the first rebuttal and say, "Oh, my opponent hasn't responded to any of my points." That should, like, honestly, at that point, the moderator should have a whistle and should blow that whistle and be like, "Foul." He is not supposed to respond to your points. He's supposed to give his opening.
Yeah.
So you get minus 2 point, like in football, like you get a flag, right? So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
subtract some time from the guy. Like that should be illegal. Come on.
Yeah.
Maybe we just need a little more active moderation. And then same thing with the cross X. The cross X, like where he's supposed to be asking you questions, he was using that to preach, like
Mhm.
straight up. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't even making interrogative statements. He would ask you a question and then he would just go off and make all these declarative statements. And the moderator did not come in, and you didn't really complain about it either. And the moderator did not come in and say, blow the whistle. Excuse me, that's not a question. Minus 1 minute for your. I
Yeah.
guess that's what I would like to see, a little more active moderation. I mean, not that he didn't step in at all, and he seemed like a really great guy. I don't want to be too critical, but I think I would like to have seen a little more of that. What would you say is the response been like so far? I mean, I know it's only been a couple of days, but you got a ton of views. Almost 200 comments. What's it been like?
So I've got a lot of positive feedback for sure. That's what I choose to focus on at first. A lot of support from mainly Unitarians, but also even some Trinitarians have come in, dropped comments saying where they thought, he didn't do very well. They've also reiterated some of the things that we have brought up. It's always good to see that when Trinitarians, from the opposite side, try and be like, yeah, I'll acknowledge that. That is true. I've also had some critiques from both Unitarians and Trinitarians. I got to say that. So the first thing is going to be that some Unitarians, I think, were a bit overcritical of me on not being as educated in the Peshitta, which, guys, all this is a learning experience. I gotta.
That's nonsense. That's
Yeah,
ridiculous. Oh my goodness. Look, man, I have spent probably 20 years working on biblical languages, right? Greek and then Hebrew. Like, I haven't even started on Aramaic yet. Like, I am gonna get there. There is 1% of the Old Testament that is written in Aramaic, and that's why it's significant, right?
mhm,
But it's like, okay, so after you master the biblical languages, the Aramaic that the Old Testament is written in, now you're supposed to learn Syriac, which is a cousin of Aramaic, so you can read some 5th century translation of the New Testament. Who
yeah,
cares?
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, I
right,
can't imagine getting down on you for not knowing the Syriac Peshitta. I don't know anyone that knows the Syriac Peshitta, like, other
yeah,
than Syriac Christians and like weird Aramaic primacy people. Um, like Garza, I think he thinks the New Testament was written in Aramaic originally, and so he had
mhm,
this like whole focus on Aramaic. But that's not common. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
Sorry, you just
yeah.
set me off. I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. Thank you. Yeah, some people I think might be a little bit overcritical. I am still learning, and so yeah, I'm gonna be more on point. Okay, next time about the Aramaic to the best of my ability. Now, some of the Trinitarians, however, who presented some critiques, it seems very clear to me that many people have been taught this narrative that the term Yahweh is like a species term. It's like a category for a type of being. Or you'll hear people say it's an essential term, which is referring to a Platonic distinction, by the way, about the essential characteristics that make something what it is, which is an idea that's not professed in the Bible. They themselves had to debate amongst themselves and each other for hundreds of years on that, about what that even means. And I mean, there's so many barriers they had between Greek and Latin. Like, it's a mess, historically. So many Trinitarians don't get that. I remember when I first learned that in the Old Testament, where you see Lord in all caps, what appeared there was actually a proper name. Sean, in the interview I did with you at Converge, that was one of the first things that you brought up. And that was beautiful to me because that was like a big deal.
Yeah.
This is a name, right? God
Yeah.
is a person, he has a name. And it's spoken about all throughout the text about proclaiming the name, professing the name. Um, you know, the psalmist asked God to do things for him just for his name's sake, right? Like an essential set of characteristics doesn't have a reputation, right?
Right.
What do you
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's not our Father in heaven, hallowed be your essential set of characteristics, right?
Your
Like,
divine nature.
right. So I think Trinitarians don't get that. And
Well, hold on. I think you might be generalizing a little bit here. I think most Trinitarians are just fine to know that the Father in the Bible has the name Yahweh. Uh, I, maybe I'm giving them too much of a benefit of the doubt here,
what I
but
I
like
mean
there's
just the
definitely like
ones
this
who
one little
responded.
corner that has this other way of thinking, right?
Yeah, it's at least the people in my comment section.
Yeah.
I don't mean to
These have got to be
overgeneralize.
Garza's people, though, right? Like people that
Yeah.
are agreeing with his way of looking at it.
Hmm.
All right, so let me just pause you there and feel free to sprinkle in more details about response as we go. But I thought it was really interesting what Al Garza's first point was. He said, and this is a direct quote from his slide. He said, "This debate is not about the Trinity or whether Jesus is God. If it is not about it is not about what the early church fathers taught, but rather about whether Jesus is identified in Scripture as Yahweh, the God of Israel. Of course, he said Yud He Vav He, which is like just the letters of the name Yahweh, which is like just an unnecessarily snooty way of doing it. And then he says, it seemed like you. So let me make my point here. So by saying this, it seemed to me, as I was watching this, that like he didn't want to talk about the Trinity, and he didn't want to talk about church history, which I feel like is a huge win for us, right?
Mhm.
Like that's like him saying like, I think I'm going to lose here, and I don't want to go into the church history because I'm going to get trounced over there. So like instead, we're just going to talk about this little box of things where I can really, score some points. Did it seem like that to you? Because like later on, you even brought it up. You're like, we can't talk about Jesus being Yahweh without talking about the Trinity, because you're assuming you're assuming a Trinitarian framework for thinking about these things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Those comments made no sense at all, and I think were really just an attempt to disengage the audience from the really the bigger idea of what we're getting at. I mean, so if Jesus is Yahweh, that means he's also God, right? With a capital G. If Jesus is Yahweh, okay, then how, right? Is he? Because I mean, obviously they believe the Father and Holy Spirit are also Yahweh. So is Jesus just a part of Yahweh? Is Jesus a mode or
Well, and that's interesting
stage?
because he never explained any of the model, any of the
Yeah.
reasoning. He was
Hmm.
just like, Jesus is Yud He Vav He, period. I win. But like he didn't explain. Well, that actually defeats the Trinity. So, but he also, he affirms the Trinity. So he needs to explain what that means.
Yeah.
And you're right. Modalism is the most obvious explanation for saying that Jesus is the Father. I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally what Sibelius and those guys were all saying back in the day.
Hmm.
And that's not what Garza affirms. So, like, he needs to account for that, and he just wouldn't get into it at all. No matter how
Yeah.
hard you push on it, he was just unwilling to go there.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
I tried to point it out best that I could. I think there's maybe one or two comments I made about it.
yeah. So another thing he did is he set up this dichotomy between Greek thinking and Jewish thinking. This is like slide 2 of his. And
Yes.
I don't think you ever really got to engage with it, but I'm going to just say that basically he accuses biblical Unitarians of Greek reasoning, and he claimed that he's using Jewish acceptance. So he quotes this one verse from Paul where it says, well, Greeks want wisdom and Jews want signs. And then Paul actually finishes that line by saying, we give them neither one. Christ crucified, foolishness to the Greeks and, whatever to the Jews. So it was like totally an example of a verse taken out of context, made to mean something new for this new context where he's going to claim to be the Jew. And then he affirms the Greek theory of the Trinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
And
did you
you
think about all that?
so I did call that one out. I didn't get to go in depth, but I did call out that the whole idea around, well, Unitarians reject God because they're trying to fit, the infinite God into their, 3-pound
Right.
brain or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
in reality, he used a whole lot of reason. He used logic. The whole distinction between identity versus predication, I think, is a an accurate philosophical distinction. His view depended upon that very thing, right? So, I think he refutes himself by making this case that you can't really understand the Trinity with your mind, and somehow that supports it. That's just ridiculous. But in fact, he is using his mind to explain God to us,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. I was trying to think of what that's called. Okay. And I thought of the phrase, the pot calling the kettle black, right? Because like they're both black. So,
yeah,
like you're using reasoning, he's using reasoning, but he's like, oh, you're such a Greek, right?
yeah,
And I asked AI, I'm like, what is that called? Is there like a fallacy for that? Or what is it called? And it just said, no, it's not a fallacy. It's just projection, where you're
mhm,
putting on somebody else what you are, whether you're aware of it or not.
mhm,
And so he was projecting that onto you. And the fact is, you are using common sense reasoning. Absolutely. No question about it. But so did Jesus in his teaching ministry. So you can find it among the prophets. There's just like a basic level of common sense reasoning that every human uses. Doesn't matter what your culture. So it's not distinctively Greek. What's distinctively Greek is talking about ousia, the sense of being, and then redefining a name that identifies a person as a substance.
Yeah.
That's super Greek. And that was
Yep.
his whole
I
case.
know, right? That's like where it comes from. Every time he says God is one being in three persons, you are in Greek philosophy world territory.
Yeah. So one of the things he said, and you already kind of mentioned this about the name of God. When he first went through it, he said, okay, the name of God is YHVH or Yod He Vav He, which we translate usually to Yahweh. And he says, well, this is related to the verb to be, which is Haya. And he's like, well, and then he went through all these different tenses. He's like, the past tense uh, is Haya, and then the present tense is Hove, and then the future tense is Yihye. And I was as somebody that like studies Hebrew and reads Hebrew almost every day, as I'm like trying to like develop fluency, which I'm not as fluent as I would like to be yet. I was thinking to myself, there's no present tense verb for to be in Hebrew. Like, what are you talking about? So I was asking my my good Hebrew expert friend, ChatGPT. I was like, I've never come across hoye. Like, it sounds like that's what it would be if it existed. It sounds right for a present tense participle. But I'm like, I've never seen, like, does that occur in the Bible? And the AI is like, no, it's not in the Bible. It's in some later Aramaic translations. And then I'm like, oh, that's right. So like Al Garza is this like Aramaic guy, and he's retrojecting his Aramaic understanding into the Hebrew Bible.
Yes.
And like there just is no word for is in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew. Okay. So Hoye maybe or Hove maybe came along later, but in biblical Hebrew, it's not there. So I thought that was kind of like a really interesting fact check thing. But like his main point with the name, as you already said, is to somehow say that the name does not refer to an individual.
Yeah.
It refers to a quality of being that you have always been, eternality, basically. You've always been,
Yes.
you're always going to be. But like, I don't know, like he didn't offer any evidence at all. And I like when I saw you arguing against it, I'm like, I don't even know how do you even argue against this? Like he hasn't made a case for it. Like he just like said, well, the word Yahweh is related to the word Haya, and here are the three tenses. Okay, well, we could say the word Ezekiel is related to the words, like strength of God or power of God or something like that, right? That doesn't prove that like Ezekiel is God's actual power. Like names are always like named after something. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yonatan means Yahweh's has given. Natan is the word for give. It's like Nathan, right? God,
Hmm.
God gave. So that doesn't mean that it's just a name, man.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you should take it like literally according to its etymology. Like, yes, there's a relationship there, sure. Like Israel wrestled with God, and then his name was called wrestles with God, right?
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. Did you ever feel like you ever were able to disprove that in that conversation, or were you just like, I don't know? It seemed like you had some heated exchanges about this whole name subject.
Yeah, it's because there was a lack of focus and there were so many different claims going on, it did make it difficult. But I mean, it really is just refuted in the simplicity of how names are used, right?
Yeah.
So Yahweh checks every box of a personal name, right? And the
Yes.
people in scripture like use it as a name in the same way they use human names, right? So it doesn't behave like an attribute or a category. And like all names, yeah, it has a meaning, but its meaning does not cancel out the fact it's still a name, right? So I think hopefully just through presenting a lot of scripture on it, people were able to just get that gist, and especially during the cross exam, right? So
in the
just like
cross exam, you got so heated at that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about the name, and you're like, "All right, Al, does God have a name? Okay, what is it?" Do you
yeah,
remember
right.
that?
Yeah, so it was from John 5:43, right? Where Jesus says, I have come in the Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. And so this is essentially, I believe, a clear concession that the Son does not have the same name as the Father. So the question is, what is the Father's name? Right? If that's Yahweh, then this is explicitly stating that that's not the name of the Son. And there are other passages like this in John 17 where he's like, I magnify your name, right? I have made known to them your name. And a big thing he kept doing was just asserting that this just refers to God's authority, to some quality of God. Again, he's like assuming that it's functioning like an attribute or a category, but that's just not the case. I mean, that so when I'm at like I'm just trying to press him and be like, okay, does the Father even have a name, right? Does he have a name? And he just couldn't answer. He like
See,
wouldn't
now that's where
answer it
you were getting
straight.
frustrated too, because you're like,
Yeah.
"Look, I know you know this," and he's
Yeah,
like,
right?
"I'm not gonna answer it. I'm not gonna answer it."
Yeah, and it's oh man, it was frustrating because in some other way where if the fact Yahweh is a name suits Trinitarianism, then they'll bring it up, right? Then you'll yeah, of course he has it. But when you want to press that to expose something inconsistent within their view, they just ignore it.
So he's citing the BDB, which is an old Hebrew lexicon, Brown, Driver, and Briggs, which said name. He literally quoted the dictionary definition of Yahweh. Okay, the entry on Yahweh, and he quoted it as follows. He said, "Name, comma, as a designation of God, semicolon, as embodying the revealed character." The dictionary that he quotes to prove that the name is not really a name, that it's really just an attribute, like the very first word it said is name, and
Yeah, right.
designation is just like another word for a name, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it just, I don't know, it was just such a weird way of thinking about the subject, and it really should have been made clear prior to your debate, which I don't think it was, because the debate question was, is Jesus Yahweh? Okay. And if he has some weird definition of what the word Yahweh means that's different than everyone else in the whole world, then
Yeah.
he needs to come forward with that, just because, like, the standard way of reading that proposition, which, like, you guys have to agree on that proposition, right? Um, is different than how he was reading it. So, like, he's
Yeah.
trying to, like, derail the debate literally from his, like, second or third slide.
Yeah.
Like, just take it off the tracks and put it on a different track and be like, all right, we're actually talking about this thing over here.
Mhm.
Um, which is just like such a weird thing to do.
Yeah, and like when we apply that to other concepts in Trinitarianism, I think it would become more clear to Trinitarians that it is pretty weird. So, I mean, is saying Jesus is Yahweh or the Father is Yahweh like saying, Fido is a dog,
Mhm.
right? Or Fido is dog, rather you would say, dog as this universal category.
Yeah.
No, like it never functions that way. Right, and he didn't make that clear, and there was a lot of derailing. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what it was. And I'm not trying to accuse him of having this as a tactic. Maybe he did, but I can't see inside of his heart to see if it was, like, done in innocence, like not even realizing what he was doing, or if it was just like kind of a handed debate tactic just to destabilize his opponent. Um, so when I play cards with my friends, I use a card's name. I use a nickname, and so do they, right? So, like, it's just a dumb thing we do. Like, video gamers do this too. They use a different name.
Yeah.
So the name I use for when I play hearts with my friends or spades is Conrad. Okay. And so, like, we'll have a piece of paper and we'll have all our like cards names on it with like columns and our score, right? And so let's say one of my kids came along later and saw that paper and it had the word Conrad on it, and the person asked, and my kid asked, who is this talking about? And somebody could just say, oh, that's your dad, and like, or you could say, well, Conrad is Sean, right?
Yeah.
We understand what this means. They're both
Mhm.
names. They're referring to the same person. So if
Yes.
Jesus is Yahweh, then it is, and that was his whole point. It's identity, not predication. So if it's identity, then they just are the same person, and we don't have any room for Trinity anymore.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah, oh, it's a great point.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I think it's the subtle influence of thousands of years of these creeds, councils, and commentary by Greek philosophers, right?
Yeah.
Their influence is wide. It permeates almost every level of traditional Christian theology, right? And so I don't think people are aware of it. They don't know where it comes from, especially Protestants. You would expect them to know more about the origins of some of these things, but unfortunately they don't. And that's what I think we're fighting against. It's not just a false belief, it's like helping people identify like what it is they actually believe, why it is they believe that, where it comes from. And it's certainly challenging trying to work through all of that. uh, but I think the power of God within us, and the God's work in the world to lead people to Him in truth gives me hope. That despite how complicated it is, how confusing it can seem, that people are beginning to see more. And I think I've heard you say this before too. Unitarianism, especially now, just has more wind in its sails than it probably has in a while. So
Yeah,
I'm
there have been times where we got pretty big and pretty sizable,
yeah,
but in the words of Dale Tuggy, we've face planted, and that's because liberal ideas came in, and basically that's how we got this universalism back in the 1800s. Like Unitarianism was huge in England in the 1700s, and then in America as well. And then it just got derailed by this whole liberal thing that came along. And so I'm keen to safeguard against any kind of progressivism in theologically speaking. Um, where you're just like undermining the authority of Scripture. Like I think we got to hold to that,
yeah.
and I think we have good reasons for that too.
Hmm.
But we're building something in our time, and the simple fact is, most people that affirm the doctrine of the Trinity cannot explain it.
Yeah,
They literally do not know what words to say to explain it. 9 out of 10, I would guess, this total guess, would offer a heretical understanding if they haven't been to seminary
yeah,
or Bible college or something like that. Right. So, like, you go to any Catholic church or Protestant church, you'd be like, you believe in Trinity? If they say yes, be like, what does that mean? They probably would say something that is not official doctrine and that
yeah.
is a heresy. Right. So, that's
Mhm.
got to be a red flag, man. That's got to be like, hey, we're not teaching this well. And if we are teaching it well, then it just doesn't make sense. Or
Yeah,
there's got to be a wake up call at some point. But people just go with the flow. They don't think about it. They look at the Bible and Christianity the way you and I maybe look at the doctor or the plumber. And we say, oh, well, they're the experts. They know how this stuff works. I don't need to look into it. But like, look,
yeah,
this is your relationship with God. This is the definition of who God is. That's what we're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
Like, don't cede this to the experts. Like, actually take the time to look into it. And I think as soon as people start looking into it, they're just like, wait, that's what it means?
yeah,
I don't even know how to imagine that. Like, how I can't even conceive of what those words mean. Like, okay, there's one God. All right, cool. Three persons. All right, so he's a three-headed God. But they're each not part of God. What? You
yeah,
just like mental eyes cross.
yeah, yeah,
And there's no analogy. I don't know. So in Al Garza's case, he offered one, two, three, four that I saw, four scriptures, um, where Jesus is allegedly called Yahweh. And what was so bizarre about these scriptures, Mike, is that in not one of them was it like a quotation from the Old Testament where it says Yahweh and it's applied to Jesus, because there are those verses like Romans 10 and like Acts 2, I think, no other name to be saved or something. Like there are places where like the word Lord clearly means Yahweh in the Old Testament context, and it's applied to Jesus. It's not that many. It's like only like 2 or 3 or 4. He didn't use any of those. So he used like verses that are just like the word Lord applied to Jesus. And then he said, oh, well, in the Aramaic translation, it uses this word Maria, which is the standard word for Yahweh. And it's like, who cares? That's 400 years after Christ. 400 years, about the same time as the Council of Chalcedon and the dual natures. Of course they believe that. And so they put it into their translation. Like, that's not evidence of anything.
I know. Oof. So well said. Yeah, it's such a subtle thing that he really was arguing for a defense of his sort of weird position regarding the Aramaic and the Peshitta, right? So he was
was
tying that
assuming it
in
without actually arguing for it.
Yeah, or making it very clear. He did
Right.
None of that was made clear to the audience.
So we can agree with him that the word Lord is used in so the first text he brought up was 1 Corinthians 12:3. Just add it to the screen. Therefore, I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God ever says, let Jesus be accursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So this word here, Lord, that was like his big point where he's like, oh, look, Jesus just is Yahweh. Okay. But that's not what it says. It just says Lord. And in the Greek over here, you can see it's the word Kyrios. It's just the word for Lord. This is the same word that's used of humans. Abigail calls David her Lord, so like, you tried to point this out, but I don't think it ever got through, because he has this idea that like, no, the Aramaic Bible is a legitimate Bible, even though it's 400 years later. So therefore it must be Yahweh here, but like, it doesn't say Yahweh.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I was like so frustrated for you, because it's like, look, at least use a Yahweh text applied to Jesus, man. And he just didn't even do that. So I don't know if you have more comments on this whole idea of Lord. Like, there's not really much there to say. Yeah, Jesus is Lord, but that doesn't mean Yahweh, right?
Yeah, the closest he got was in Psalm 110 that's quoted throughout the New Testament. He also brought up the prepare ye the way of the Lord. Those 2 verses were the closest that he got, and he blew right past him, right? His main texts are like what you're talking about, which really are him trying to double argue for the Peshitta as original, right?
Yeah. So I've got this pulled up here. So he says, the Lord, all capitals, says to my Lord. And you can see, since I'm using the NRSV, it actually lowercase is the L on Lord there, which is kind of cool, because the mainline Christians behind the NRSV are not evangelicals, so they don't need it to actually teach the doctrine. They can just be honest with what it says.
Right.
But then over here is the Hebrew. There's God's name right there. It says Yahweh Ladoni, right? So the lamed there, that's a prefix. It means to. So it says Yahweh to Adoni, my Lord. And then sit. So this is the command form for sit right there. Sit to my right hand, right? So he was trying to say that both of these are Yahweh.
Yes.
And that was just like, you guys got into that in depth, and it's like, it doesn't, like, this is the Hebrew. And then he's like, oh, well, I have a manuscript where it says Adonai here instead of Adoni. Okay. And that little, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little dot under the noon there. The noon is like kind of a bracket looking character. And the little dot underneath it is what makes the E sound. And if it was a straight line or like a T symbol like this right up here, it would be an I sound instead of the E sound, right? So it's a very small difference of the the vowel under the letter there that's going to go from Adoni to Adonai, right? So he's correct about all that, but like this is what the manuscript says. And what you brought what you brought out was the Septuagint, and you were saying, oh well, in the Septuagint it says my Lord, which is what Adoni it translates to as my Lord, Kyrios mu. And then he wouldn't accept that either.
Yeah.
And he's just like, no, I have a Hebrew, and he kept doing this. Like, I have a Hebrew manuscript. It's like, what do you mean you have a Hebrew manuscript? There are no Hebrew manuscripts of 1 Corinthians 12. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like the earliest Hebrew manuscript is the Shem Tov from the 14th century, and it just has Matthew. It doesn't have 1 Corinthians.
Yeah.
And like the Hebrew manuscripts that we have of like Psalm 110, for example, either they're Masoretic texts, which means they have these vowels like that we just saw, or they don't have the Masoretic markings, in which case they don't have the vowels. So it's like it's up to the reader to decide what it is. Yeah. So and then I remember this too. Sorry, this is just kind of a jumble, but
no, it's not.
It's coming back to me as I'm talking. You know, I kind of verbally process this, and then he whips out a Targum. And he's just like, yo, the Targum says, the Targum says, you know, Yahweh or Adonai there or something like that. And it's like, okay, so look, you have the Bible itself. Okay. Then you have translations of the Bible. And then you have paraphrases, right? So like the Bible itself, the Hebrew, Yahweh, Ladoni, right? So Yahweh to my Lord, sit at my right hand. That's what it says in the Hebrew. Okay.
Yeah.
Then you have, say, you know, like we were just looking at the New Revised Standard Version. That's a translation. Okay. Which one is the one with the authority and the inspiration of God? It's the Bible. It's not the translation.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's Aramaic is a translation of the Hebrew. I don't care if it's the 5th century Peshitta or it's a 2nd century BC Targum. Like I did a little looking into this, Mike, too, just out of curiosity. The earliest Targumim we have, like actual like manuscripts, is from the 6th century. They believe they were probably written in the 1st century or 2nd century, but like the earliest one, like actual piece of paper that we have is from the 6th century. But even if it was from the 2nd century, like the Psalms are hundreds of years before that, and we don't ascribe inspiration, we don't ascribe authority to a translation, much less a Targum. A Targum is a paraphrase of what the Jews, how they explained it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And look, this is very obscure. Like no Christians even know about Targums typically, right? It's like it's just such a weird thing to bring up in a debate.
Yeah.
You know, because like the debate should be about the original text, either in an English translation or in its original language. You should not be bringing in these other like stuff from hundreds of years later.
Yeah.
It just seems so weird to me.
It was great music to my ears. Absolutely, getting to process myself more after. A lot of that became more clear, and sort of makes you more frustrated in the moment. But because like here's what happened: what that does is now we're debating whether the Leningrad Codex is accurate or not. It's like where in reality we should just be assuming, well, hey, that's like the main Hebrew text that most scholars accept, right? So now we're debating that. And he also made some comments about the Adonai versus Adonai that I really wish maybe I had pointed more out. I sort of did when I said he's like on the borderline conspiracy stuff. But his whole reason for why he thinks it was changed by the Jews is because, oh, well, they would have figured that Lord would have been like Abraham or Hezekiah. And I'm like, but it's very clear that the Messiah would be a human being from the line of David. So like, what do you mean? Right? That's not a motive to want to change it, right? If it had said the tetragrammaton there, right, or referred to that, I think we have good reasons to think that that's just what it would say still, right? I mean, there are like other passages sort of like that, like the, Yahweh sent down fire from Yahweh. And like, there's all sorts of things that I think probably would have, quote, been changed to. And so then we're debating that. And that's sort of off just where it can be fruitful, right? There's this thing we all agree on. Leningrad Codex is good,
Yeah.
and we
Well,
can
I
just
mean,
move forward.
this is really the main problem that I perceive with this. I guess there were a few problems, but like this one really was a main problem. Okay, so he has a different understanding of what counts as the Bible than all other Christians. Okay,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
than you. And he also has a different understanding of what God's name is than all other Christians. So like these again are things that need to be specified when you're like in the early stages of working on a debate question to agree on. Like you
Yeah.
just need to have a certain amount of common ground, otherwise the debate will need to be on those things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like you're trying to argue that Jesus is not identified as Yahweh, and all you have to do is show one difference, that Conrad is at the store and Sean is at home, and boom, Conrad isn't just Sean. Like there's got to
Yeah.
be something else going on here, right? You
Mhm.
identify one difference: Jesus died, God never died. Boom, Jesus can't just be Yahweh. And it should just be that easy of a conversation to have, and then he can respond back on that and be like, oh, he didn't really die. And then you can come back and be like, well, then your sins aren't really paid for, but instead we're talking about the Masoretic pointings on the vowels, and whether or not a name is a name.
Yeah.
And that's just so frustrating, as a listener, because we're not doing this. We're not seeing two things connect. We're seeing more like this, where he's talking about one thing and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, here's my argument. Engage with my argument.
Yeah. And
So yeah,
there was
that was
like a
a
dozen things
downside.
like that.
Yeah, there was. Yeah,
Yeah.
just over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one of his points that I thought was kind of interesting is that man cannot redeem or atone for another man.
Mhm.
And he listed some verses from the Old Testament. And I think those verses in the Old Testament are talking about the law. And like it, according to the Torah, you couldn't punish somebody else for that person's crime. So like you rob a store, they can't punish your uncle,
Yeah.
right? So that like I don't think that's talking about salvation at all. It's just
Yep.
talking about like criminal law, basically, which parts of the Torah do that.
Mhm.
And so he's like universalizing those and saying, oh, this is how God's economy of salvation works. It can't be a human being. But like, isn't Jesus supposed to be a human being for him too?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. So that was something that I also thought I wish I had just verbally said. I tried to when I brought up those three verses and I questioned him on it, right? So I say, hey, you're saying that God can't save by a man, but yet that seems to be exactly what these passages are saying. But as you just beautifully pointed out, he actually was referring to a text that's not even talking about salvation in that sense, right? He's talking about punishments for the law. So two different things,
Yeah.
two different things. So yeah, I wish I had maybe focused on that a bit more, but I think the scriptures I presented there, again, they're so clear, right?
Yeah.
How can you misunderstand that? And if it's true that Jesus did need to be fully divine, then why don't we like see that, right? Why doesn't it say, since by a man came death and we can't be saved by a man, God sent fully divine Jesus? Or none of that stuff is stated, right? They just read all of that into the text. Oh, he also kept saying, well, we affirm the full humanity of Jesus. Like, yeah, congratulations. You also affirm full divinity, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And you tried to bait him a little bit on hypostatic union, and he just would not go there at all. Like
yeah.
he's just like, I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole, because as soon as you get into that, you definitely have the advantage as a biblical Unitarian, because it doesn't really make sense once you like start talking about, okay, so he's God and man at the same time. So he knows everything and he doesn't know everything. He can die and he can't die.
Mhm.
He has no beginning and he has a beginning, just on and on. Like
Yeah.
it's just square circles. So I thought it was admirable that you were trying to pull him into that, because he really does have that as part of his system, even though he wasn't willing to go there.
Mhm.
What do you think about his? I think I counted 11 pre-existent. He had a slide with 2 slides, 11 pre-existence verses on it, totally unrelated to the topic.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what did you think about that? Like,
So
here's a bunch of pre-existence verses.
yeah, man, there are so many things that could have been called out and pointed out. That was I realized that towards the end that you could just grant him all of those, right?
Yeah,
Okay, he pre-exists. That doesn't automatically mean he's Yahweh, right?
no,
Yeah,
definitely not. Yeah, there are these people called Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if you ever heard of them. You know,
yeah,
they believe he pre-existed and isn't Yahweh. So,
yeah.
you know, it's just a red herring. You know,
Hmm.
it's just like to distract. You know, he wanted to fight about pre-existence probably because he felt pretty confident on that. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
want to create. I don't want to specify his motives because I don't know this guy at all. Would you debate him again? What do you think?
At this point, I don't know, but I'm definitely going to accept. I think some of the good critique you have mentioned. You know, also Dale warned me right from the beginning that he was going to bring in a lot of this weird stuff.
Yeah,
I probably should have. We need to have a conversation. I need to know what your view actually is on Yahweh, right?
yeah,
Apparently, because we if we want to come in and actually get somewhere about whether Jesus is Yahweh, we can't also then be turning this into a debate about, the vowel points and the Leningrad
yeah,
Codex and then these words in the Peshitta, even though it's just this far late text that
yeah.
represents one
It's a
percent.
translation, man. It
Yeah.
is
So
a translation. Here's something to just throw in there. Uh, so like the first text he really harped on was 1 Corinthians 12, verse 3, right? There's no way Paul would write to a city called Corinth in Aramaic. Nobody in Corinth can read Aramaic.
yeah,
What do they read? They read Greek.
yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
whether Paul spoke Aramaic or not is a secondary issue. Like you're not going to write to a city in Greece and write it in Aramaic, a language that's like basically like Gaelic today. Like nobody really speaks it. There's like a few people in Ireland that know it, right? But like you're not going to write to Rome, Washington D.C. and write it in Gaelic. You're going to write it in English because that's what the people there speak. That's their So
yeah,
you know
yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. This whole thing.
It
Uh,
well, and you. Sorry, I didn't mean to
I
interrupt.
want to ask you this: what if he agreed to give you his opening statement ahead of time?
I'd probably agree. It would make
Because then
it
at least you
more
would
open.
know what is his plan,
Yeah, right.
right?
Well, it's just like when he's, for example, he's bringing up the difference between Maria and Mar, and like that whole thing is assuming that that text is authoritative to begin with, right? So
Yeah,
now it's like we're not really even debating about whether Jesus is Yahweh. We're debating about whether the text is accurate, whether it's valid, and he would just disregard all of the text I would present, which predate his, which are what is most accepted. Right,
yeah,
he doesn't have to debate that because everybody already agrees those are the standard that we use, right? So
yeah,
that it was completely unfair. So yeah, I'd probably agree under the right conditions, and I think in regardless any debate going forward, I want to use more wisdom prior to actually doing it.
yeah. Well, I think it was good that you did it, and you know, for my money, I wouldn't mind seeing you debate him again, uh, under any conditions. I think it makes us look good, because we have just common sense and we have the Bible, and he's got this weird Aramaic stuff, and a certain way of approaching things that nobody's ever heard of before.
Hmm.
Obscure reasoning,
Yeah.
um, based on grammatical nuances. They're not commonly accepted. So I think it just makes us look good because like we're just like, well, this is what my Bible says, and he's like, oh yes, but the Peshitta, you
Yeah.
know.
You're right.
So I think it did some good for the cause. I think if in any debate, if you can swap, there are some times where it's really advantageous to swap opening statements just to like make that rebuttal strong on both sides.
Hmm.
Because like in the moment, it's really hard to think.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know how you held it together for 4 hours. That was insane.
It was definitely tough, but I did my best. And Sean, I really appreciate you bringing me on to talk about it, help process through some of that. It certainly
Yeah.
means a lot. And yeah, I want to do my best. I think Unitarianism is true. It continues to offer better answers, but I always want to do the best at
Yeah.
portraying them, what those are. Right.
Well, thanks, Mike, so much for joining me today to have this conversation. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate it, Sean. Thank you.